Hi, I'm Nick. If you're totally new to web design and development, or if you need a refresh, this is a good place to start. In this course, we're going to learn how to write HTML and CSS, which are the basic building blocks of any website. Don't worry if you've never written a single line of code before. We'll learn step by step so that you can follow along. By the end, we'll have created our very own personalized website that's live on the web, available for anyone to view. Let's take a quick tour. This website has 3 pages. There's the portfolio page, which you can see here. This allows you to show your design work, photography, or anything you'd like. In fact, you could easily customize this area to display your favorite family pictures. Next, we have an About page. Here, you can post a profile picture, along with a brief description of yourself. Finally, we have the Contact page. Here, you can list out contact details like your phone number, email address, and Twitter handle. This is useful if you're a web designer available for hire, or if you're running a business and you want people to be able to reach you. We'll explain everything in detail, but let's warm up by writing a single line of HTML. We're going to write our name and then wrap it in what's called a headline element. This element is just like a headline in a newspaper. It labels an important section of the page. I'm going to type out some code, and then in the code challenge after this video, you can type in your own name. The screen we're looking at is called Workspaces. We'll learn more about workspaces in the next video, but don't worry about following along just yet. For now, just try to listen and absorb the information so that you're ready for the code challenge after this video. First, we'll need to type an opening angle bracket. On most keyboards, you can do this by holding down Shift and pressing the comma key. Next, we'll type the letters H followed by the number 1. This will let us create a level 1 headline, which we'll talk more about in upcoming videos. Now, we'll close this with a closing angle bracket. Just hold down Shift and hit the period or full stop key. You'll notice that Workspaces has completed this line for me. It's typed the closing tag for this H1 element. I'm going to go ahead and delete this closing tag though, so that we can learn how to type it on our own. We've created the opening tag, but we also need to make a closing tag to pair with it. To do that, we'll type the exact same thing, only this time we'll include a / just before the H. So we'll type an opening angle bracket, a /, and once again, it's completed it for me. But after the /, we'll type an H, a 1, and then a closing angle bracket. And that will complete the H1 element. Now, between these two tags, we'll type our name. So I'm going to click between the two tags here, and I'm going to type my name, Nick Pettit. But you can go ahead and type your own name. And that's it. In the code challenge, you'll create an opening H1 tag with angle brackets, type in your name, and then create a closing tag with angle brackets and a / just after the first angle bracket. Are you ready to code some HTML? Let's try it out. As we build a project, you can follow along in a tool that we call Workspaces. Let's take a few minutes to learn about Workspaces and see what it can do. To open a workspace, just click the button next to this video. This will allow you to open a new workspace where you can type your code and build the project. Your workspace will probably look the same as mine, but if it doesn't, don't worry. It just means that Workspaces has been updated since this video was created, and you're using the latest and greatest version. It should still work the same and allow you to follow along. I'm going to switch over to a second workspace that I have open in another browser tab. This has the completed project, and it's what your workspace will look like when you finish coding this entire website. Let's take a quick tour of the interface and get familiar. The file tree on the left lists all of our files and folders in the project. We can click on one of these files to bring it up in the editor. We can also click the right mouse button to bring up a context menu, which allows us to create new files, delete files, and generally make changes to the directory structure. I can also click and drag files to put them in other folders. I can also click on these triangles to the left of folders to open and close them and see the contents of the folder. For now, I'm going to switch back over to my blank workspace. At this point, you should start following along because each video builds on one another, and you might be confused if you start from somewhere in the middle. When you're ready, create a new file and call it index.html. You can do this by right-clicking and selecting New File. Alternatively, you can go to the File menu and select New File. Both will work exactly the same. Once you've created your file, call it index.html and hit Enter. If you accidentally hit Enter before naming your file, just right-click on it and select Rename, and it will allow you to go ahead and rename your file. Once you've typed that in, just hit Enter. You'll notice that when I hit Enter, Workspaces automatically opens up the file in the text editing area. This is where I can make modifications to the file, and it's basically where we'll build out our site. Now, I'm going to type an H1 element. Workspaces has a feature called code completion. When I type the first H1 tag, it automatically closes the element for me and moves the insertion point between the opening and closing tags. This allows me to work more quickly because I'm typing less code. Between the tags, I'm going to type my name, but you should go ahead and type your own name. Now, let's save the file. We're going to save files very frequently, so it's best to learn the shortcut key for this. On a Mac, simply press Command S to save the file. On Windows, press Control S. Right now, there's a little orange dot next to the file, meaning it's unsaved. When I save it by hitting the shortcut key, the dot disappears and my changes have been saved. Now, we're ready to preview our web page. I'm going to open up the preview area by clicking this icon in the upper right corner. And just like that, we can see what our H1 element looks like in a web browser. When I make changes to the file and save them, you can see the changes in the preview area immediately. Let's try changing the name here to something else. So I'm going to highlight my name, and then I'm going to type something else. When I hit the Save keyboard shortcut, we can switch over to our preview and click Refresh, and you'll see that something else now appears in the browser. Now, let's switch back to our workspace and undo these changes. You may need to undo things frequently, so it's also best to learn the keyboard shortcut for this. On a Mac, just hit Command-Z. On Windows, you can press Control-Z. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to undo our changes. Then I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to save. And finally, I'm going to switch back to our workspace. And we need to refresh the page to see our changes. I could just click on the refresh icon here, but instead, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to refresh because once again, refreshing the page is also something you're going to do frequently. To refresh on a Mac, just hit Command R. To refresh on Windows, hit Control R. I'm going to refresh our page here, and as you can see, our changes have been reverted. Workspaces has a lot more to offer, but that covers the basics. I recommend you play around with Workspaces to get familiar with the interface. As you work through projects on Treehouse, you'll learn about specific features of Workspaces as you need to use them. HTML, or Hypertext Markup Language, forms the structural foundation of any web page, but there are many other languages that fall into the realm of web development. To build this project, we're also going to learn CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. This language will help us modify things like fonts, colors, page layout, and so on. Just about anything that has to do with the visual aesthetics can be accomplished with CSS. Just like HTML, we'll get into CSS in much more detail later on, but we should try out some simple CSS first, just so that you can see how it works. Let's jump into our workspace and add some style. Workspaces has several settings that we can adjust depending on our personal preferences. I'm going to click on the View menu, and I'm going to select Highlight Active Line. This won't change anything about the project, but it will highlight the line that we're working on. If I press Enter a few times and create more lines, you can see that it will highlight wherever my cursor is. I'm going to delete these extra lines because we won't need them, but if you'd like to turn on line highlighting as well, you can go ahead and do so in the View menu. You can also make other changes in the View menu, such as increasing or decreasing the font size. You can also restore the default font size. In addition, you can adjust these using keyboard shortcuts. So I can go ahead and hit Command+ on my Mac to increase or decrease the font size. Now, let's get back to our project. So far, we have a first-level headline element on the page. Let's try to change this to a blue color. Just above the headline, I'm going to create a new blank line, and I'm going to type some style tags like this. Once again, you'll notice that Workspaces auto-completes the style element once I've typed the opening tag. Now inside of these tags, we can write CSS, which is another language in addition to HTML. We'll learn more about CSS and HTML, but for now, just go ahead and follow along with me. Even though we're doing this inside of our HTML file, CSS is a different language with a different syntax, so pay close attention. Now, I'm going to hit Enter a few times to make some room to work. Now, between our style tags, I'm going to hit the Tab key to indent my code slightly. That way, I'll know what code is inside of my style tags, and it will be easily readable. This doesn't affect the functionality of the code at all, but once again, it makes it easier to read. These tabs will make it clear that the code that I'm about to type is nested inside of our style tags. Down in the bottom right, you'll notice that Workspaces has automatically detected that this is an HTML file, so it will highlight our code appropriately and make it easy to read. You'll also see the words spaces and to down here. If I click on spaces, it will switch to tab size, but we want to keep this as spaces. The difference is that when I hit tab, having spaces selected will type spaces instead of a full tab. You can see that there are two separate spaces here if I highlight it. I can adjust the number of spaces it types by just clicking this number 2 and changing it to a 4 and hitting Enter. Now, if I type in my workspace and hit a tab, it will actually indent by 4 spaces. This is just a personal preference, so you can go ahead and change this to whatever you'd like. However, most programmers use spaces, and they only use 2 spaces. So you may want to keep those defaults. Once again, this will not change the functionality of your code. It's just personal preference and makes your code easier to read. I've deleted my tab, so I'm going to hit tab once again, which will actually type 2 spaces in this case, and I'm going to type H1. This is what's called a selector. It will tell the browser which HTML element we'd like to apply our styling to. More specifically, this is what's called an element selector. There are many different types of CSS selectors that we'll learn about, but this one is very simple for now. Next, let's type a space after our H1, followed by 2 curly braces. You can type curly braces by pressing Shift and the square bracket keys on your keyboard. So that's an opening curly brace, and that's a closing curly brace. Now, place your cursor between the 2 curly braces and press Enter twice. This will give us some space to work. Once again, I'm going to hit Tab to indent my code again because the code I'm about to type will be nested inside of this element selector, which is nested further inside of our style tags. Finally, we're ready to apply some styling to our headline element. Type out the word color like this. Then type a colon by holding down Shift and pressing the semicolon key, followed by a space, and then typing the word blue. At the end of this line, type a semicolon. The first part of this line is what's called a property, and the second part of this line is what's called a value. We'll go over many CSS properties and values later on, but for now, it's just important to get the syntax right. In workspaces, if you highlight a CSS color, it will give you a preview of what that color looks like. Make sure that you've typed everything in your workspace, just as I have in my workspace, and then save the file. Once again, you can do this by hitting Command-S on a Mac or Control-S on Windows. You can, of course, also do this by going to the File menu and hitting Save, but it's faster to use the keyboard shortcut. Now, if we preview our workspace, you'll see that the text color has changed from black to blue. Changing colors is probably the simplest thing that you can do in CSS. There's much more to learn, and as we'll discover, CSS is extremely powerful and can do far more than just simple text formatting. In fact, most CSS is so complex that you wouldn't ever want to put it inside of your HTML document. As we'll learn later on, most websites are built with separate HTML and CSS documents. If you think you're ready, take the code challenge after this video and write some CSS on your own.